Hi, welcome to the Intro to Fiction Writing series. Today, we're going to talk about setting. Setting refers to the world of your story with all its splendors. Can you think of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll or The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum without thinking of setting? Settings aren't just memorable on their own. Settings influence the characters who live in your world, the events that happen, and all the details of that world, like the weather, clothes, food, language, and everything else you'll write about. In this video, we'll cover 3 elements that make up your settings. 1, the place or location where your story happens. 2, the time period when your story happens. And 3, the rules of your world, which help you and your readers to understand what is possible and what isn't. Along the way, I'll talk about a setting I picked for one of my stories, and I'll cover how each of these elements applied to that setting. Let's begin with location, because that's what most people think about when they think of setting. The location is where the story happens. It can be a smaller place, like a room or a cave, a huge collection of places like a planet or universe, or any number of places in between, real or imagined, building, neighborhood, city, state, country, continent, you name it. In fact, one of the reasons people read stories is to visit new places they may have never been before, or to revisit familiar ones they love. When we write stories, we want to choose settings that are memorable, but also settings that work as the right background for the events in those stories. Let's say you want to write about a character who takes horse riding lessons. An obvious place for that might be a farm or horse ranch, which are typically located in areas with a lot of open grassy land. You're probably not going to use a setting like the ocean unless your main character is maybe riding giant seahorses. That's not to say you can't set the story there. It just means you need to make the reader understand why you did, because horse riding typically happens somewhere else. I'll give you an example of the location I chose for my story. I needed a place that had snow in the wintertime, but where you could still get around easily because people plowed and shoveled the sidewalks. So I chose Massachusetts. I then made up a city inspired by a real city there because I wanted an established neighborhood with a park and a school near enough to the main character's house for him to walk to. I also wanted a place with people from different walks of life and multiple cultural backgrounds, similar to the real city my city is based on. My main character is of French-Canadian heritage, and he befriends a boy from Puerto Rico. It was important to me to honor the diversity from my own experiences and to bring that into my story. So what else is important to think about when picking a place? How about the feelings people have around that type of place? How do you feel when you think of hospitals? What about carnivals? They're a bit different, right? And you'd likely set different kinds of stories in those locations. Let's think of some other examples. How about cemeteries or big old houses? Those are often used for scary stories because they tend to feel creepy or spooky. What about ancient ruins in the jungle? Sounds like a great location for an adventure story because of the sense of mystery and discovery. Did you notice something else about these places? Certain locations are also associated with certain types of stories. Science fiction stories are often set on spaceships or in outer space. Stories of knights and dragons are set in castles and forests. Pirate stories are set on ships and desert islands. Thinking about the type of story you want to tell can give you some great ideas for the locations where it should take place. This is also a great way to transition to the topic of time periods. But before we do, let me leave you with one more thought about places. Every location has nitty-gritty details that make it stand out and come alive for your readers. Think of a seaside town. There's the sights and sounds of the seagulls flying overhead and waves crashing along the beach, the briny smell of the ocean on the breeze, the feelings of the cool, misty, damp air in the early morning, the taste of fresh fish and chips at local restaurants. Make sure to include lots of sensory details to help the reader feel like they're in that place. And if you need help finding details, go visit the place if you can, or do some research. There are all kinds of travel guides and online resources about the different places in the world we live in. Okay, now let's move on to the time period of your story. Setting isn't just where the story takes place, it's also when. For example, stories on spaceships are usually set in the future. Stories with knights or pirates are usually set in the past. You can have a modern day story about a knight or pirate set in a city, but you'll want to think about how that makes sense. Did they time travel? Were they frozen for all that time? Are they modern day knights or pirates rather than traditional ones? So many questions to explore. But for now, let's refocus on the question of when your story occurs. Picking a time period can help you focus your writing on things that can happen then. The present is easiest because you're living in the present, and you can use events and technologies and places that exist in the world you know for inspiration. If you set a story in the future, you'll have to make up the details and imagine all the things that will be possible in that time period. How will people travel? What will they wear? What jobs might they have? What kinds of foods would they eat? A future setting gives you all kinds of possibilities, but you also have to put in the work to make it feel real. Likewise, when you set a story in the past, you have to do research to get the details right. For example, you don't want to include cell phones in a story set 200 years ago because they weren't invented yet. Time doesn't just mean the year or decade or century, though. It can also mean specific times of year and specific days. Spring is often used as a setting for stories about transformation or new beginnings because nature seems to restart then. Summer is often used for stories about visiting new places because people go away on vacation then. Don't forget about how certain events and holidays happen in certain seasons too. School years start in the fall, so stories about school often start then, along with pumpkin-flavored everything. Halloween also happens in the fall, so we have stories like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving that take place then. Winter, on the other hand, is a time for snow and Christmas stories. Speaking of which, let's talk about my story again and the time period I chose. Because I wanted to write a classic Christmas story, I decided to set it in 1952. The location I chose worked well because I knew the city I used for inspiration was around back then, and so was the neighborhood. But I also had to do research about that era to get the details right. For example, department stores weren't in malls back then. They were just in big buildings. So I included a department store on a street based on a real one in the past, so that my main character could walk by it and look at the Christmas display in the windows. I also have a scene where the main character is talking about having to look something up and going to the library to do so because there was no internet in that time period. I even included a scene where Santa checks in with the main character during the day on Christmas Eve, and he shows up in shorts and sandals. But it's winter. Why would he do that? Well, it's cold in Massachusetts at Christmas time, but warm in Australia. And during that time of day in the United States, it would be nighttime on Australia, and Santa would be delivering presents. So he'd be dressed appropriately for Australia's climate. Since he was only taking a quick break to visit the main character in the US, Santa would change into his warmer clothes when he officially returned to deliver presents in the United States that night. This is a good bridge to the last thing I'm going to talk about today, the rules of your world. I just noted that Australia has different weather at Christmas time. The holiday is the same, but the experience is different based on the location. That's something to be aware of as an author because the world we live in works in a certain way. Trees and plants usually grow up towards the sun. Gravity keeps us from floating away. Our stomachs rumble when we get hungry. When you set a story in the real world, you can use those same rules in your fiction. But when you use your imagination to change the rules of the world or to create new worlds, you need to figure out what the new rules are in the world of your story. Think about superhero stories. Even though the superheroes have special powers, there are rules about how they work and how they don't. There are also limits to what our heroes can do. The same holds true with stories about magic. Remember the fairy tale with the spell that only lasts until the clock strikes 12? If there are no rules, then your story stops working as a story. For example, if your character can just wave a magic wand to solve all their problems, then there's nothing to write about. The story is over as soon as it begins. That's what the rules are for. They tell you what can happen and what can't. And don't worry about including all the rules in your story itself. You don't even have to write them all down. You just want to know for yourself as you're writing so you can follow the rules from the start of the story all the way to its end. I'm going to give you an example. Have you ever tried to play a game with someone and they change the rules on you along the way? Does that get you frustrated? It's the same thing with stories. Our readers expect things to work in a certain way. Doesn't mean you can't surprise them. You just want it to be a good surprise instead of one that's going to make them throw their hands up in the air and say, "I am never playing with you again." Let's look at my story one more time. What rules did I follow for my setting? Well, because it's mostly based on the real world, the bulk of the rules are the same. Falling from a window ledge is still dangerous. Bullies are dangerous in different ways. Hot chocolate is still a good way to warm up after playing in the snow. But Santa appears, so it's safe to say there's magic in the story. However, most people don't believe in magic beyond believing in Santa, and the magic is used to help things along, not to solve problems. For example, there's a magic scarf in the story that can be used to make friends. If you let a person borrow it, they'll warm up to you. If you put it on an animal, it'll be your best pal. If you put it on a snowman, it'll come to life. Though that only works once a day, and you want to make sure that you've given the snowman a face, arms, and legs first. Also, the point of the story is that you can make friends without magic. So that's what my character needs to do. He has to earn his ending in a way that makes sense in the world of his story. So what do you think? Are you ready to find the right setting for your story? If so, keep these 3 things in mind. 1, the location, which answers the question of where the story takes place. 2, the time period, which answers the question of when the story takes place. And 3, the rules for that location and time period. Altogether, these elements can help you pick a well-balanced setting that serves the story you want to tell. And if you include lots of nitty-gritty details, you'll be sure to whisk your readers away to an exciting world that feels real. That's it for me this time around. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also let me know if there are other topics you'd like me to cover by leaving me a note in the comments. Until next time, happy writing.